let's get into the rest of our rankings, risers and fallers. Scott, we'll start with the risers. Feel free to mention all the names, but if you're going to go in depth, maybe just focus on like one or two of those.
Alrighty. So some of the risers that I sent to you include Ryan Jeffers. Let's start with that one because people have been clamoring for us to move him up in the rankings. Got him in the top 13 last week. Here's where I have Ryan Jeffers now. You ready for this? 8th in roto, 7th in points at the catcher position. I mean,
I moved him up to 9th in both.
Yeah, there. Say I got you beat again. Beating you on everybody. So that puts him ahead of Jonah Heim and Luis Campusano and Logan O'Hoppe. And frankly, that seems like a pretty easy call. I also have Jeffers ahead of Cal Raleigh in points leagues where the strikeouts hold back Raleigh a bit. Jeffers has been great with the strikeouts. Jordan Westberg, who I famously said I didn't think had the potential to be a top 12 second baseman early this season. Well, I now have him 7th at second base. Yeah. Yeah. I've moved him ahead of Xander Bogaerts and Gleyber Torres and a lot of those struggling second basemen who I don't feel like have stud upside anyway. I think Jordan Westberg might have them beat in the upside department. And yeah, it's not like you're feeling too good about Bogaerts and Torres right now anyway. So he's ahead of them. He's ahead of Nico Horner, Andres Jimenez, etc. Let's see here. Tarek Skubal. Chris brought up after Tarek Skubal's last start that maybe he should just be the number 1 pitcher in fantasy. Well, I made him number 2. I went almost all the way there. Zach Wheeler, I have number 1 because, he's just such a workhorse. And with the additions to his arsenal this season, he looks like the best version of Zach Wheeler we've ever seen and just seems like an ace among aces. So I had to keep Zach Wheeler at the top, but Tarek Skubal's number 2 now. I mentioned earlier I moved Shane Baz into my top 80. I moved Brian Wu into my top 65. I moved Braxton Garrett into my top 85. Just getting ready to, anticipating the return of these IL players who are Wu and Garrett especially. They're going to start next time through for their respective teams. I moved Christian Scott into the top 50. Let me see if I can provide you with a little context for that, who he's ahead of. So I moved him ahead of Nick Pivetta, who did not look so great in his return today. Mitch Keller, how about that? Got Christian Scott ahead of Keller. Somebody offered me that in the podcast league, Keller for Scott straight up. I thought about it, but I said no. 3 spots different in my rankings. I got him ahead of Carlos Rodon, who looked good today. We'll talk about him later. I got him ahead of Walker Buehler. So Christian Scott, I have about where you have Paul Skeens, Frank. Paul Skeens or Christian Scott?
I actually thought about that today. And I got Skeens at 49. I think I have Scott at 56. So he's just behind. I would prefer Paul Skeens, yeah.
Sure. Okay. Those are my risers.
Okay. Some risers for me. I moved Christopher Morel inside of my top 16 third baseman and inside the top 30 outfielders. Willy Adames is now my number 13 shortstop in both formats. I moved him ahead of both Anthony Volpe and Willy Adames. That is who I'm talking about. I moved him ahead of Xander Bogaerts. So Bogaerts is off to a rough start. Volpe's come back down to earth. Adames is playing for a contract. He's someone we really liked last year as well. So really like what I've seen from him so far. 3 outfielders. My 19th, 20th, and 21st ranked outfielders in head-to-head points. Tyler O'Neill, Riley Green, and Brendan Nimmo. Scott, I just saw that you have Riley Green 40th in your outfield rankings.
Yeah, that needs to change. I've updated everything but outfield and relief pitcher. I ran out of time. When the podcast.
You should have told me beforehand. I wouldn't have called you out.
I should have. You're right. No, I still need to update outfield. But yeah, Riley Green needs to get up into the top 30. I would imagine. Where did you say you put him?
I moved him up to 20th in head-to-head points.
I don't know that I'll have him quite that high, but yeah, needs to be higher than 40th for sure.
And then another riser for me was Kyle Bradish. He's a name I mentioned earlier. I think he's a little bit difficult to rank right now because, as we mentioned after his season debut last week, he was a pitcher I really liked coming into the season before we knew about the injury. I think I had him ranked as a top 24 starting pitcher. the idea of this torn, like slightly torn or sprained UCL is still in the back of my mind. And I think it presents a lot of risk,
Sure.
but so far he's pitched really well. And he
Yep.
pitched well again here on Wednesday. He threw 5 innings, 1 run, 9 strikeouts with 12 swinging strikes on 90 pitches. Velocity has been fine so far in each of his first 2 starts. I moved Bradish up to SP 35. I can see the argument for him being lower based on the risk, but he's a guy that I liked a lot, and he's healthy for now. So I moved him up that high.
Yeah, I don't mind it. I have him 49th, which sounds like a big difference, 14 spots difference. But it's a really, really elastic group.
Yes, certainly is. I could have Paul Skeens in that group after his first start this weekend. Who knows? Let's get into some of the fallers, Scott. Who were some of the players sliding down your rankings?
Sliding down for me. Okay, so probably the most notable. I guess let's start with Trey Turner, who's sliding for obvious reasons. He's out for the next 6 weeks. How does that impact his value in a practical sense? I moved him to 8th in my rest of season shortstop rankings, which
same
drops him behind some obvious names like Gunnar Henderson and Corey Seager and Francisco Lindor, but also CJ Abrams. Somebody came to me today offering CJ Abrams for Trey Turner. I am buying into CJ Abrams enough that I think I'd do it. Obviously, it depends somewhat on who else I have filling in for Turner, blah, blah, blah. But generally speaking, I'm going to take Abrams over Turner right now. Paul Goldschmidt might be the struggling stud bat who I'm most worried about. And I'm pretty close to just saying finito.
Uh-oh.
So yeah, I got him down to 11th in Roto, 13th in head-to-head. I could go lower, so that moves him. The reason he's lower in head-to-head is because I moved him behind Yandy Diaz and Vinny Pasquantino. They got the great plate discipline, and so I value them more in points leagues. I have Goldschmidt ahead of them still. It gets tricky with guys like Alec Boehm and Isaac Paredes, who have been great so far, obviously, but I don't think have close to the upside of Goldschmidt. Am I ready to move Goldschmidt behind them? Not yet. But boy, if somebody offered me a Paul Goldschmidt for Isaac Paredes right now, I'd really have a hard time with that.
I don't think I would take it either. Goldschmidt was one of those names, and there were a few of these when I was doing the rankings where I thought about lowering them. I couldn't do it yet, but I am close to that point. And Nolan Arenado was another one like that. Alex Bregman was another one I thought about moving down, but ultimately I did not lower any of those names. Gleyber Torres was another one, but let me give them a few more weeks and see what happens.
I'm totally cool with Bregman. I think he's going to be fine. Kind of worried about Nolan Arenado, but very worried about Goldschmidt, obviously. Okay, so Michael Busch, I've had to come back to reality with him, and I've moved him behind Alec Boehm and Isaac Paredes, which may seem obvious. I also moved him behind Christopher Morel at third base. I moved him behind Jake Cronenworth at first base. And Cronenworth continues to climb the rankings for me. At second, he's now 13th, and looks like you have him there too. And then finally, Eric Fetty, I referenced him earlier. He's back outside of the top 75 for me, which puts him in very droppable territory. It was a disappointing follow-up to those 2 great starts, and there's just not much margin for error when you're pitching for the White Sox.
Mm-hmm.
I think on a good team, Eric Fetty might be a top 60 pitcher for me, but on the White Sox, he's outside of the top 75.
All right, some fallers for me in the rankings. I moved my 17th, 18th, and 19th ranked first baseman right now are Yandy Diaz, Spencer Torkelson, and Michael Busch. I have lowered all of them down and just ahead. I have Isaac Paredes at 13, Jake Cronenworth at 14, Rhys Hoskins at 15, and Nate Lowe at 16. So those are the names just ahead. They're guys that have performed well. It's pretty much backed up by the StatCast data as well. So, I'm starting to move some of those names down, like the Yandy Diaz's of the world. Nolan Gorman, he is outside my top 20 at second base. It's been a struggle. He's not playing against left-handed pitching. I moved Verlander outside of my top 40. He's, I think, SP 41. And Detmers, who has struggled recently, I moved outside of the top 50 starting pitchers. He's right behind Paul Skeens. He is my SP 52. Some of the underlying stuff is still good for Detmer, so I don't want to just bury him yet. I think there's a chance he could bounce back, but the obvious, the service level numbers have not been there recently for Reed Detmers.